No one understood why billion-dollar CEO Richard Hale, known for never losing anything, was suddenly challenging the old janitor to a race over a dusty employee parking lot. But when that rust-eaten 1930 Cadillac engine first growled to life, it wasn't the metal that shook people. It was the truth that followed. The morning sun struck the pavement like a spotlight, announcing the beginning of a show no one knew they were about to witness, casting long golden bars across the massive industrial parking lot of Haletech Industries, where the scent of gasoline, fresh coffee, and ambition swirled in the air, mingling with the metallic hum of thousands of workers clocking in and out like gears in the giant machine that was the company. In the center of it stood Richard Hale, the titan of industry, a man whose name alone made investors salivate and rivals tremble, the man whose face was plastered on magazines as the king of accelerated innovation. And today, unexpectedly, he stood with sleeves rolled up, designer sunglasses halfway down his nose, staring at something that made his otherwise perfectly controlled jaw clench involuntarily as though the universe itself had the audacity to mock him. That something, or rather, someone, was Julius Carter, the old black janitor whose spine curved slightly from years of labor, whose hands bore the scars of mechanical work long since forgotten by history, whose quiet presence in the hallways had always been as invisible as oxygen, necessary and unacknowledged. Yet today, he stood before Richard like an equal, holding a set of keys dangling from a crooked metal ring attached to a battered, rust-crusted 1930 Cadillac that looked like it had escaped history's dustbin, only to be laughed at by the modern world, its paint peeling like old scabs, tires balding, headlamps fogged like elderly eyes clouded by time. And yet, beneath that decaying exterior, something felt alive, like the soul of a sleeping dragon that had only been waiting for someone foolish or brave enough to wake it. Workers began gathering like moths to a flame, whispers traveling faster than any engine that would race that day. Why is Mr. Hale talking to the janitor? What even is that car? Did he actually say race? And Richard, sensing the audience swelling around him, raised his voice, sharpened it, turned it into spectacle, because spectacle was the air he breathed, and declared with the same arrogant certainty that once signed billion-dollar deals in silence, "You can have my company if you beat me with that junk," letting the word junk drag out just long enough to slice pride from bone. The laughter around him surged, workers relieved to stand safely behind sarcasm, to side with power. But Julius didn't flinch. His expression didn't shift. Not a twitch, not a breath giving away emotion, only the slow, deliberate lift of his chin as he said, in a voice like weathered oak and unspoken history, "All right." And the word hung in the air like a prophecy. Richard expected pushback, confusion, excuses, something. But instead he got acceptance, immediate and unbothered. And that acceptance unsettled him more than any verbal fight would have, because he was a man used to others, trembling before his terms, not matching him with quiet certainty. As more employees spilled out, phones raised like modern torches capturing every second, Richard stalked toward his pride and joy, the Viper X prototype, a machine so sleek it made the Tesla Roadster look like a tricycle, its shimmering metallic blue body reflecting the crowd like a liquid mirror, a silent promise of unstoppable velocity. Julius, meanwhile, walked toward the relic, every step measured like a heartbeat, fingertips brushing the hood of the Cadillac as though reacquainting with an old friend, his breath steady, as if he were inhaling memories instead of air. Beneath the hood, hidden from all eyes, including Richard's, was a secret that had been buried by time, erased by betrayal, and coated by the dust of complacency. A secret that would unravel everything Hale believed about power, legacy, and ownership. Richard couldn't help but snicker to the CFO standing near him, speaking just loud enough to be heard by those closest. "He'll be lucky if that thing even starts," garnering approving chuckles like a king tossing crumbs to peasants. But Julius only opened the door of the Cadillac, slid into the torn leather seat that molded itself to him like it remembered him, like it recognized its original pilot. As he gripped the steering wheel, A flicker of images slid behind his eyelids. Decades ago, another man sat there with him, younger, laughing, sketching engine diagrams on napkins stained with grease. Richard's father, Samuel Hale, the man whose name history claimed alone, though the ideas that built Haletech had come from more than one mind. The old engine coughed once, twice, then roared awake. Not loud, not flashy, but deep. A sound that felt older than the asphalt beneath it. A rumble like thunder beneath earth, and every phone in the lot lowered just a fraction as people leaned in, fascinated because expectation had just cracked open. Richard tightened his grip on the steering wheel of the Viper X, slipping into the driver's seat like a gladiator entering the arena. Adrenaline merging with ego, convinced the whole thing would be over in 5 seconds. That Julius's acceptance was nothing more than a senile old man's stubbornness. But there was something foreign crawling at the back of his neck, a feeling he didn't like. Doubt. The COO approached to ask quietly whether they should stop this, fearing media fallout, investor panic, or worse. Looking foolish. But Richard waved him away with irritation, because power was a drug, and humiliation was something other people felt. Up ahead, 2 yellow parking lines stretched across the lot like a makeshift finish line, the sun blazing overhead as though nature itself demanded witness. Julius shifted gears, his hand steady, while Richard revved the Viper X, the sound violently dominating the air, trying to drown out the quieter heartbeat of the Cadillac. Then, with employees lining up on both sides of the unofficial track, like spectators at an ancient chariot race, someone shouted, "Go!" and the world exhaled. Richard shot forward, like lightning slicing through wind, his prototype car unleashing power that felt like the future itself had bent to his will, leaving Julius behind in a cloud of dust and disbelief, cheers erupting. But those cheers faded almost instantly into murmurs when the Cadillac, after hesitating like a waking beast, lurched, coughed, and then surged, not fast, but steady, smooth, a pace that looked like time itself was bending around it. Richard, confident and mentally rehearsing his victory line, didn't see it at first, didn't notice the strange silence of his car as the dashboard flickered, the engine choking as though bitten by the ghost of its past. He cursed, slammed his fist on the console, unaware that deep in its electrical framework lay a 40-year-old design flaw, left intentionally by the one who never received credit, Julius. The Cadillac rolled forward like an unstoppable truth, inching closer as Richard's Viper X sputtered to a humiliating halt just feet before the finish. And as the relic rolled past him, slow, quiet, certain, the crowd fell silent, their disbelief heavy as gravity. Richard sat frozen, hands limp on the wheel, watching history rewrite itself, not with a roar, but with a whisper. Julius crossed the finish line, and for a long, stretched second, no one moved. Not Richard, not the crowd, not even the sun seemed to breathe. Until Julius stepped out of the car, his spine straightening, old age falling away like a costume, revealing something regal beneath. He walked to Richard, not fast, not triumphant, but with the grace of a man who had known suffering and chosen dignity instead of vengeance. And as he stood before him, eyes deep like wells filled with untold stories, he simply said, "Your father made a promise." And those 5 words detonated something inside Richard, greater than any humiliation. Because promises were sacred in his father's legacy. Promises were what had built Haletech, not steel or engines. The employees around them stared not at a janitor anymore, but at someone mythic, someone who clearly held a missing chapter of their company's story in his weathered hands. Richard stumbled out of the car, face pale beneath the sun, his voice cracking like a boy stripped of power. What promise? And though Julius didn't answer yet, the weight of everything left unsaid, betrayal, erasure, legacy, hung between them, thick enough to choke the air. Somewhere in the distance, a reporter's camera clicked, sealing the moment into history forever. And in that stillness, before Chapter 2 would unravel truths long buried, Richard Hale, king, CEO, conqueror, felt something he had never felt before in his life. Smallness, the kind that came not from losing a race, but from realizing he may have never actually earned what he owned. And the Cadillac, quiet now, sat behind Julius like a throne, waiting for its rightful ruler to remember who he once was. The parking lot, once loud with engines and ego, now sat in stunned, holy silence, as though the asphalt itself had absorbed the shock of what had just happened. Employees who minutes ago laughed at Julius now watched him with widened eyes, trying to rewrite their memories and fill in the gaps where this man, this quiet janitor, had existed unseen for decades, sweeping floors while holding history in his bones. Richard stood frozen, his breath shallow, his confidence crumbling like sandcastles under incoming tide, feeling the weight of Julius's words. "Your father made a promise," echo inside his skull with the force of a hammer, striking an anvil forged from guilt and curiosity. The Cadillac, dusty and ancient, idled like a sleeping beast, its engine slowly quieting to a soft purr that sounded eerily like contentment, as if it had finally been seen again, finally remembered, finally allowed to roar after decades of silence. Slowly, the circle of employees parted as Julius walked, not away, but toward the massive glass facade of Hailtech, where the automatic doors slid open as though bowing to him, inviting him to step into a building he had only ever entered with a mop in his hands. Never as a man with a story, never as a name spoken in respect. Richard followed, stumbling at first, then catching himself, forcing his posture to straighten, though inside he felt like a child trailing a ghost, and together they walked through the lobby, where a giant mural depicted Hailtech's founding, a young Samuel Hale sketched in dynamic color like a visionary destined to reshape the world of automotive innovation, his hand touching blueprints, his smile bold. But next to him, where another figure should have stood, where a signature should have existed, where truth should have been carved into history, there was emptiness, a blank space painted over long ago. Julius stopped in front of that mural, staring at it the way one stares at a gravestone that refuses to speak. And everyone around them, secretaries, interns, executives, paused their day, their screens, their tasks, sensing that time itself had been interrupted by something more important than profit margins or quarterly reports. "Your father and I built the first engine in a garage smaller than your office closet," Julius finally said, his voice carrying both pride and ache, his hand trembling slightly as he lifted it to touch the cold glass covering the mural, fingertips leaving faint, foggy marks. But when the world came looking, when success came knocking, when investors wanted a face that looked like them, he chose survival over truth. And though his words were gentle, they struck Richard like physical blows, because Samuel Hale had always been a legend in his mind, a father made of bronze and glory, a man who was larger than any flaw. "He promised me a place at this table, a name beside his, a legacy shared," Julius continued, and the pain in those words, pain layered through decades, trembled beneath his breath. But every time he tried, someone told him no. Someone richer, someone whiter, someone louder. And then one day, he stopped trying. And suddenly, Richard's image of his father cracked, fractured, splintered under the weight of a truth he had never imagined. Not betrayal born of cruelty, but betrayal born of fear. A long silence stretched like a wound between them, until Richard whispered, barely audible, desperate, "Why didn't you take it back? Why didn't you fight?" And Julius allowed himself the smallest of sad smiles, the smile of a man who has wrestled with destiny and learned to surrender not from defeat, but from wisdom. "Sometimes," he answered, "a man chooses peace over justice because fighting means becoming the monster who wronged him." And Richard, who had spent his life choosing victory at any cost, felt something inside him soften, something raw and unguarded, an emotion he had never allowed into the empire he built. The executives watched, waiting, unsure of whether to step in or stay silent, until one voice cut through the tension. The COO, trembling because he saw what was coming: a transfer of power, a rewriting of ownership, a shift that could change everything. "Sir, legally, if this race was binding—" But the sentence died as Richard raised a hand, silencing him with a gesture that carried none of his former arrogance, only the weight of a man standing on the edge of metamorphosis. "I don't care about legal," Richard said, each word slow, clear, almost unfamiliar to him. "I care about right." And the employees, for the first time since the company's founding, saw a Hale who wasn't a titan, but a human being. Julius studied him, searching his face for sincerity, for the boy he once knew, Samuel Hale's son, who as a child used to sit on Julius's knee while he drew engine parts in the margins of newspapers. The boy who used to call him Uncle Jay. The boy who no longer remembered because adults had erased the memories to preserve their empire. "There is a room in this building," Julius murmured, voice falling low, "that your father sealed before he died. One only he and I ever entered." And without waiting for permission, he walked toward the executive elevators, swiping a rusted keycard that should not have worked, but somehow still did, as though the past itself willed the lock open. Richard followed, his pulse racing, his palms sweating, every step toward that room feeling like a descent into some sacred vault. When the door slid open, the hallway beyond was unlit, cold, lined with dust thick enough to hold fingerprints from decades ago. At the end stood a steel door with a single embossed word, "Prototype," but beneath it, faint, almost invisible beneath layers of age, was another engraving, carved by hand, letters shaky: Carter and Hale. Richard's breath left him, slow and disbelieving, as he reached out to touch the name he never knew belonged there. And when Julius unlocked the door and pushed it open, light flickered on, revealing machines covered by tarps, diagrams pinned to corkboards, photographs of a younger Julius and Samuel shoulder to shoulder, laughing, building, dreaming. Journal entries filled the desk, Samuel's handwriting confessing regret, apologizing to a man who was never meant to read it after betrayal was already done. And in the corner sat a model engine, small, bronze, hand-forged, and engraved with the words, "For the one who made me more than I was." Richard collapsed into the nearest chair, the weight of inheritance crushing him, the truth of legacy reshaping him. Tears, real, unexpected, slipped down his jawline as Julius watched silently. "Your father loved you," Julius said quietly, "but he feared losing everything he built if he gave me what I earned." And Richard, choking on grief and guilt, whispered, "Then let me be the one who finally gives it." And there, in that dusty, forgotten room, history shifted, not because a race was won, but because a man finally understood that legacy is not what you take, but what you return. When they emerged again, the crowd still waiting, breath held, Richard did not stand ahead of Julius, but beside him, shoulder to shoulder, and his voice, when it rose, carried through the parking lot with the force of fate itself. "Ladies and gentlemen, meet the rightful co-founder of Hailtech." And the world, as if rewritten by wheels, engines, promises, and time, finally spoke Julius Carter's name. Months passed, and Hailtech was no longer the same company that had once been run by ego and shadowed history. Its lobby now held a new mural, repainted with reverence. Samuel Hale and Julius Carter standing side by side, two men whose work reshaped the world, finally both honored. Julius's name appeared on every patent he helped create, newly republished. His pension, once an insultingly small number, was replaced with a board member's salary and an office overlooking the city skyline. Though he still sometimes walked the factory floor, smiling at workers who now lifted their heads to greet him as Mr. Carter. Richard Hale, changed by the weight of truth, stepped down as CEO. He became something else, a student instead of a king, spending his days learning engineering under Julius's guidance, discovering the parts of his father's legacy that weren't written in financial reports, but in hands stained with grease and dreams. On a quiet evening, Julius stood alone in the parking lot where it all began, the sky painted orange with dusk. The 1930 Cadillac sat beside him, restored now, its metal gleaming like memory made new. Richard approached, holding a single envelope. Inside it was one document, full ownership of Hailtech, signed over to Julius Carter, not out of obligation, but honor. Julius smiled, but gently placed the envelope back in Richard's hand. "I never wanted the company," he said. "Just the truth." They sat in the Cadillac together, engine humming like a living heart, and Julius, for the last time, took the wheel. The car rolled forward, slow and steady, disappearing toward the setting sun. Some stories end with a victory, others with a loss. This one ends with a man finally being seen,